Just as a brief introduction, I would say that Kenneth Gergen is professor. He's a co-founder of the Taos Institute. He's the author of a number of books and articles, and he's one of the main characters in the theory of social constructionism. And for the last thing I want to mention, he's a very, very friendly man. So please welcome Kenneth Gergen.
Thank you. Very generous. I don't deserve it. They deserve the praise today. 10 years that they've been promoting these sorts of dialogues, keeping this whole profession alive in terms of adapting, thinking through where we go next, what are we doing, how are we doing it, because it's always complicated and there are no answers. So the dialogue is essential. And to have a group that promotes that, I think it's just fantastic. And I feel honored that you would let me be here for your 10-year anniversary. Wonderful. So what I hope to do today is to talk a little bit about what I see as the issues we face right now, why all these increments in problems and diagnostics and so on. I am overwhelmed by these issues. Yesterday I did a workshop trying to get them to help us think through, because there are no real secure answers. And I think we move into right now a space that we've never confronted before. And it's frightening a bit to me. Secondly, I want to offer what I think is a possible idea, another way of thinking about systems. Obviously, family therapy, but indeed the society. And then finally talk a little bit about what I see as some of the ways one might go. And I do that humbly because, again, I am insecure about where we're going, and I think we all should be. Well, first of all, what is it like to grow up today as a child, a young person? I mean, there's already this issue of the environment, not knowing, in fact, what in 30 years the world will be like. Whole continents may be unlivable. Water supplies dried up. Immigration, a major issue across the world. To live on that, I mean, it's like, for what it was, a little bit like what we had as living under the atomic bomb threat for a while. It was really frightening, but that sort of went away. But the environmental issue doesn't go away, it just gets worse. And then to watch the fact that nothing much is happening, and those adults are not doing it, and no one seems to be doing it. I mean, what is it like to grow up like that? That's to say nothing of the pandemic and the possibility that a disease could sweep through the world, leaving many, many dead, including your mother, your grandmother, possibly. To say nothing of the war that's just right around the corner, and others that are now beginning to develop. Populism, kind of racism, that's part of every day. The immigration, there's new people that are unfamiliar. I mean, I compare that with growing up in a community which was pretty stable. I knew everybody. I felt safe. I knew where to go. I knew what to do. I knew what the future looked like. I mean, in some way it was constraining, but it was very secure. Now, I look at those issues that I just talked about, the environment, the pandemic, and so on, actually as, if you might say, symptoms of a larger process that's going on. They are just a piece of the larger, of a much deeper issue or set of processes. Let me talk about that. Now, we went through a century ago what it was called the century of science. It was, in some ways, the apex of the Enlightenment. It was Galileo now through age of rationalism and so on, and finally that was all instituted in science. That knowledge which would allow us to basically control the future. Now we had it together through careful observation, systematic observation, theory, experiment, and so on. We could cure diseases that had never been cured before. Right? We could harness energies that never been harnessed before. We create technologies that have never existed. And all in one century. Just think of it, all in one century. You got combustible engines, you got radio, television, electricity, jet propulsion, atomic energy, computers, wave after wave of technologies. And in some sense, how wonderful. I mean, early in the century, this looked fantastic because it meant your mother, your grandmother didn't have to wash clothes by hand. There were washing machines. She didn't have to sew by hand because of the sewing machines. And there were cars that would allow you to go more than a mile or two. You didn't have to walk or ride a horse. Engines that would work in the fields for you as 100 horses in one tractor. Fantastic. Toil was reduced. Diseases were reduced. We had clothing that could be mass manufactured, so it could be you didn't have to make it yourself or have a tailor. It was just there and inexpensive. And you could have plates that looked wonderful. It looked like that of luxury, but you could do it for very little money. I mean, all these goods that were taking place. Fantastic. So science becomes the light of the future because increasing knowledge meant increasing predictability, increasing control, increasingly good lives. And we here are the byproducts in terms of a profession of exactly that kind of thinking. That is, the social sciences developed because you had the natural sciences to create certain kinds of technologies, but we needed to have control of the populations and behavior. So there would be no prejudice. There would be, people would get along well. There would be, families would all be happy. Children would all learn in school. There would be a cure of mental illness. There wouldn't be any. We would move toward paradise. So social sciences, psychologists are going to solve the problems of mind. Therapists are going to help actually do that in the work in this, the practical work of changing. This is part of the cadre of workers who are going to change the world for the better. And we're still into that logic, aren't we? I mean, we think we're going to change things for the better. I still hope for that, or I wouldn't be here. But consider that for every technology, every innovation that has taken place, there is, first of all, an invitation to more innovation. Right? Whatever is produced will be an invitation for more innovation, more creation. Whatever is produced, someone will say it can be done better, more efficiently, cheaper, more profit. Just take the telephone, which becomes now a pocket phone, which becomes now a watch. It becomes a camera. It becomes your access to the world in general. And it will continue. So every innovation will be an invitation for more innovation. Now, the second piece is every innovation is an interruption in the social fabric. Every innovation will destroy some pattern of life which we now lead or have led. Every innovation will change the time you have to do X, Y, or Z. It will change where you can do it, why you would do it, who you would do it with. Now, if you look at it that way, what science has done is to give us the possibility for infinite innovation. And that will continue. And it will continue to disrupt and destroy whatever understandings, whatever rituals, whatever ways of life that we have had before. Now, for some people that will be welcome. For others it won't. Some people will gain power because of that. Others won't. Some people will gain advantage. Others will be left behind. And that will enter into families, communities, nations. I mean, already even 20, 30 years ago, we realized what's going to happen in family life. I mean, as soon as you had television, already families don't talk together, they watch TV together. Gather around the TV for the evening. Bring in a cell phone and your children aren't there under the table with messages. Bring in a cell phone and your teenager will be part of another community that is not you, like a different tribe has been developed living in your house. You don't understand them and they don't understand you. But now you add to that, the adults have computers, so the child is on a cell phone, the adult is on a computer, somebody else is on a cell phone, somebody else has gone to a meeting in the evening because you can do that, somebody else hasn't come home because they need to stay overnight at their work. And you pretty much destroyed what we know about his family life as we've read about it, tried to practice it. It is just moving out into all sorts of different spaces. Communities, same issue. What is a community anymore when no one is there to speak of? The daytime, everybody's on the road somewhere else. What is it to live in an apartment building? Because are there jobs in the cities when there isn't any real community? The thing that bothers me is that there's no end to this. It's out of control. There's no government that can control this continuous expansion of technologies. In fact, some of the owners of the technologies have more money than some nations. We in the United States are in this difficult position that one owner of a technology, developed the Tesla, now has so much money that they run a social media network, which now becomes a political influencer with millions of people. So they become influences of the whole politics of our nation. It's frightening. And no one can control it, because if you control the politics, it controls the freedom you have to do what you do with the media. So where do we go? It's almost like preparing for a world in which change will be continuous, disruption will be continuous, and you have to learn somehow to move with the flow instead of trying to create bastions of security, because they won't last. They become people who can move with this continuous disruption in multiple directions. All right, now think of, again, children. What does this mean for children? insecurity. Where are we living? I mean, in the United States now, the average number of homes that people will live in over a lifetime is now bordering on 10. Different places you might live. And I realize I'm talking partly out of the United States background because what we're experiencing is probably about, I think, 10 years in advance of what you have here. Now, somehow you've managed to keep things together in a way that we haven't. But it's all coming. When attention deficit disorder first was made known in the United States as a diagnosis, other countries didn't have it. And I was talking in Finland to a group of therapists at the time, and I said, look, you don't have it yet, but wait. And indeed, 30 years later, it's a major issue in Finland. Everybody knows about it. There are treatments for it, there are therapists and diagnosis and so on. It's a fixture. United States, about 1 in 10 children will be diagnosed with one deficit disorder before their career is over, and will be given drugs that they can't get off because no one knows when the disease is finished, as if it was ever there in the first place. Okay, so what is my future when in fact all the jobs are going to be changing? I don't know what I'm going to be because I don't know what there will be. I think I'd like to be a lawyer, but if you're even half sensitive, you know that AI is going to change the whole face of the legal process within 10 years. I had a friend's daughter who wanted to be a doctor, planning all the way through to be a doctor until she faced medical school, and then realized that what she had looked at as being a doctor was going to be caring for people, talking with people, actually consulting with people, that she was going to spend her life behind a computer. It was all being mechanized, and that's not what she wanted to do. So she's trying to find something else. How can you plan what you want to be when the third of the professions won't be there, and there will be new professions? How do you train? How do you ask somebody, what would you like to be? Don't you think we ought to be thinking about your future? What future? If I live in a community and there's only sort of a set of agreements about good life, fine, we know what to do. It's a good life. But what if we live in a community where you are parts of other communities because the people, your friends, are online? And your friends do video games and they're not there. Your friends are really cool and look at all the rest of this as BS. And your parents know less than you do. And what they seem to know is irrelevant. So, who is the authority? Who has the right? Because any authority is being criticized by some other group who finds it inappropriate, wrong, unjust, unknowledgeable. Who are the authorities? In a world in which there are multiplicities, in which there is, in which the numbers of voices that can be created in small groups within a computing world are virtually infinite, in which there are hundreds of new religions every year because you can form a new religion, new groups that you live in. My grandson, who is now transing, parents can't deal with it, and his friends at school are having trouble with him being trans, but his community's online. They've never met each other before, but they keep each other supported all the time. That's his community, and it's not there face-to-face. It questions other authorities. So who is the authority? And it's fascinating to watch this. The younger generation has challenged gender distinction that's been there for centuries. There was no doubt about men and women before and what was appropriate in terms of kinds of relations we have. It written almost in constitutions. Centuries and centuries and centuries, within 20 years, it's totally fluid. The whole idea of what gender, who should be attracted to, what attraction means, just being swept away. And we didn't do it. Younger generation did it. And it's dumbfounding. All right, so his transing grandson, when he was 14, he said, I'm gay. He was really into it. And he was looking for a boyfriend. And at 17, he says, I finally had my first gay relationship. And I'm really finally found someone, and I've actually consummated that relationship. And I'm just really delighted. So he wanted to have a party at my house because his partner, was going to go away for the summer. I said, okay, good. I have a pool in the back of my yard. And I said, fine. But I was kind of curious to meet his friend. And his friend came over, and if I looked physiognomically, it was a girl. Like large breasts, hair, neck. It was like, I don't know, it looked like a girl to me. And I asked him about it later because he's having this really nice relationship with him. And he said, well, it is a girl, but she's transing to male. So now that makes her male, and therefore I'm still gay. Now, I don't know what to make of that, but he said, well, look, it's just fluid. And it just didn't take much time to do that, and it is total disarray, and it's pushing schools, it's pushing adults, it's pushing us politically. So, as a kid, who are you? I don't know exactly where I fit because all the distinctions are disappearing. What about ethics? What I should do? What is a good thing to do? What is a good thing to do? Where do you go for that? Most of us have problems with that at this point because there are so many ethical positions, which we hear too, so the decisions are very difficult. For every position that you espouse, there are at least several other groups who are going to disagree with that, and often you know those. It's hard to take a stand because it's complicated. Hard to teach ethics because we don't know exactly what's right and wrong either, except under certain circumstances. God knows we've had a hard time with the Israel-Palestine issue. Everybody's right, everybody's wrong. And people want to take sides and make it clear that who's right and who's wrong, and it just escapes you as to how to solve that ethically. So where do you go with that? What does it matter? What does it matter if you take something because, so what? Where's the guilt? There may be shame in being found out, but what would be the source of feeling guilt about anything? So growing up where is the clarity of growing up, the reliability, the sense of direction, sense of ought, of what's necessary? Why shouldn't you just sort of say, I don't care? Just hopelessness or ennui, whatever. What would you do? So you get this directionless melange of multiplicities, of continuous change, of inability to see where, what, why. And again, I contrast the ease with which most of us grew up, where everything was really quite clear, pretty clear, what there was to do and what one should do. And it's just going to get more and more of this. So what we do as therapists, then, we get the results, the low end of a massive process, which is going to continue. And who has answers? I don't. Part 2. Another idea. At least, maybe, I found some spaces for hope. Now, what is a relationship? Well, normally, in terms of traditions, a relationship are when one or more people get together. We form a relationship. So we're single individuals, and we can be married as a relationship, we can be friends as a relationship, we can be a group, we can be a family, but it's always a matter of the atoms getting together. Now that way of thinking, which is essentially thinking atomistically, is built into our language and has been there for centuries. It's a way of thinking about what there is here as a collection of units. Each person, chairs, tables, cups, windows. In some ways very practical, because I can say, okay, here is the glass. How can I make it better? What do I do with it? I can name it. I can do things. You know when it's there. That is an atom, and having a single name for that as a bottle of water is very helpful. But it's not helpful for a lot of other things, because there is no way of describing the whole, what's going on here, all of it at once. As is a large configuration, it's very difficult to describe. You can look at a pointillist painting, and you could look at every dot, but something else happens, which is, you might say greater than the sum of the parts, which is the whole picture. So we can say some of the parts, but we don't ever know quite how that happens. It's like magic. How does the sum become something else? So it's a way of thinking that is atomistic, and again has been there forever. And it's not only configurations that become difficult. It's movement of any kind. Things which stay relatively stable, no problem. But if I do what just happened, well, you moved. Is that it? That's all the word you got? Well, movement. I mean, you're almost dumbfounded because atomistic language won't allow you to account for movement. So realize that we're kind of stuck in this language. which makes it very difficult to think about what is the flow, and to characterize that flow. You can't think it in the sense of articulating it. How to go beyond that language so that we can grasp something about relationship which isn't boiled down to the single individuals. When we boil it down to the single individuals, ultimately, we will live in a world in which the individual will count more than anything else, in which you yourself will count, first of all, more than much else, unless you've got some particular ideology. That is because you know, first of all, you know, here I am, and somehow I've got to take care of myself. I've got to learn to control, to speak, to be responsible, to look good, be presentable, because other people are going to be evaluating me. There's me and there's you. And my first priority has got to be me. My first priority has got to be me. And in some sense, a lot of our ethics, going from Christianity through contemporary feminism, is care for the other, compassion for the other, help the other. As if otherwise we wouldn't do that. I mean, it's a plea to get outside yourself, because everyone knows the self is going to be first. So the ethic is to say, oh, please don't be just yourself, or love others as yourself. And most of our theories in contemporary social science support that. Everybody knows from Darwin on that the organism attempts to save itself, to preserve itself, to sustain itself. Freud, pleasure principle. We grow up, first of all, with a pleasure principle, and all the rest is layered on top. Microeconomic theory. What people are maximizers of profit, minimizers of loss. And that becomes our way of life. Making sure we get as much as possible for the minimum cost. I mean, that's the whole theory of economics based on that. Because that's what we presume everybody's doing. Conditioning is people respond to pleasure and they will avoid pain. That's fundamental. So it's just built in. And if we understand that basically you're out for yourself, even though you may be really nice to me, I don't know what's under that. You may profess your love for me, but if I'm not giving you rewards in some degree, you're probably going to leave. Because love exists sort of only if it is profitable to the people who are involved with it. You know? Why should I stay in a family when it's not helping me? When I'm oppressed by my family, or it's not supporting my career, or what I really need to do with my life is X and you're not letting me, I'm out of here. It is also to say that relationships become secondary to the individual, right? Because those relationships are artificial. That is fundamental of the units, and we build a relationship. Or we say, I'm not in a relationship now. Or, well, let's work on our relationship. Like it's a building, and we're not doing it very well as a in some way, in the United States, if you really follow out what we have as a kind of code of autonomy, raising kids in order to be autonomous, it's not clear why you'd need a relationship. It would be a drag on your autonomy. God forbid that should happen. Make your own way. Do it my way. Self-made. Kind of narcissism is invited, where I take care of myself, my wardrobe, my way of looking, my way of thinking. All right, so I'm just pointing out some of the fallout of this sort of atomistic way of thinking about relationships. And I dare say it is really hard to think about it otherwise. Because if we take what we might do in a relationship, let's say talking, that's movement. And I don't have any words for the movement. I can say, you speak, and I speak, and you speak, and I speak. Because all the language is in the you and the me. But whatever that's going on there, it's in motion, and I can't account for it. So it's difficult even to think of any other way to talk about relationships, given the language we have. So, following a sort of Wittgensteinian idea, look, it's beyond language, show it. That is, I can't say it, but I can show it. I can demonstrate it, but when you start talking about it, you're going to reduce it to atoms. Let's say, Jorn, are most of the people in this audience Danish? They are. Okay, I spoke, he spoke, but what happened? I did something that sounded like a question. He did something that sounded like an answer. But until he gave me that answer, what was it? He has taken what I have done and given me the grace of making it a question. And until he made it a question, it was nonsense. I have invited him to do something, and he has made it into an answer. Okay? That's the unspeakable part that we can't describe exactly, is the coordination. How it is that those two things actually move together to make meaning, that we've given meaning to something. We've done a nice thing together. Ease, proper, feels good, and yet it took the coordination to create it. So the meaning isn't in me, and it isn't in him. It's in exactly the way we move together in those two things. And again, you can describe each one, but you can't describe the coordination. You can try to recognize it. Now, there are a lot of choices here, because we've done a nice thing that's recognizable, but he could say, you idiot, of course, it's in Denmark, isn't it? Now, he's coordinated, but the coordination is not going to work very well in terms of our relationship. I'd like to look at this as kind of sort of a destructive form of coordination, where the relationship will deteriorate. There's a coordination which undoes the very form of the relationship, undoes meaning. Because if he says that, I'm going to say, well, you never told me about the audience. I mean, we're going to end now into something which is not going to work very well. It's going to be a degraded and ultimately destructive form of coordination. On the other hand, I can say, thanks a whole lot, because that really helps me to understand whom I'm talking to. We're into something else. We become something in the form of the coordination. Now, it's not only have we coordinated in a way which creates meaning, as I have no meaning until it's coordinated with somebody. Okay? I can, if I just sit here and talk to the wall and you're not here and do all this, you're going to lock me away. So I have no meaning until there is a coordination of some kind in terms of what you do with it. I tell you, I do a lot of Zoom lecturing these days because travel is not good for the environment. There's nothing worse than giving a talk like this and it's over and everybody's gone and you don't know what you said. It just seemed empty. Like you didn't know whether you talked because you don't have the feedback. Yeah, that's okay, that's okay, that's okay. I mean, I continue to talk because you keep your eyes open. So I've got no meaning until you give me meaning. Nor does Jorn, nor do any of us. Nothing means anything without the coordination with others. But let me go back to this a minute. In the first case where Jorn says, yes, they are, by whatever I did, we become nice guys. I mean, he's made me into a nice guy in the first verse. So like, if he had come back and said, you idiot, of course, we're in Denmark, I'm going to respond with some snarly, awful way. So the coordination has created us for who we are. That is, I become snarly, he becomes whatever. It's like, so the form of the coordination creates the individual as opposed to the individual creating the relationship. Let me put it in a sort of clearer way. I'm not a tango dancer unless we're dancing the tango. I'm not a tennis player unless I'm playing the game. As the game comes before being the player. It requires the participation in the game to be the player. If I set up a discussion, let's say between two political candidates, and it's a debate, they're going to kill each other. They're going to find pretty much whatever the other one says is pretty wrong, stupid, ill thought, misleading, lying, and vice versa. It will be a coordination, but it will be deteriorating, and each of them will become awful persons. If I bring them, let's say afterwards we have a cocktail party, and I say, hey, come over, Charlie, to my group, and so on, get those people together over a drink, they may laugh together. Wasn't that a show? So, who are they? It's the pattern of the dance. The pattern of the dance is there before them. In the form of the dance, we become who we are. We aren't anybody outside of some dance. Most of those are pretty easy. We talk with each other and chit-chat with each other and fine, and we just keep life going. But that's really important, just that chit-chat, normal, everyday, seemingly trivial chit-chat keeps us all together. But various other forms of coordination are going to be a problem. So it is to say that put the relationship prior, the relational process prior to the person. The process before the person, not the person in him or her or whatever self. Process before the person. Now, if you look at it in this way, look, there is no family, there is no relationship, there is no community, there's no country, but outside of the coordinations. Let me fill that out a little bit. Language is essentially based on coordination. I can say cup, and we all agree with that. But if you don't agree with that, there's no meaning. I mean, it's like, I'm just sitting here making an idiot statement that that's a cup, and you say, foolish. And it's only in this agreement that you say, yeah, that's cup, that it becomes a cup. So all my language is not language until you agree but that's language. And if I'm speaking Chinese, for most of you, it just sounds. Just sounds. So to be language requires coordination. So everything we say, we have co-created. Everything we say is co-created. We together, not you and not me. Language is quintessentially an outcome of a relational process. Put it more broadly, everything that we create, everything we say is real, is only real because you and I agree with the language and the way it's used. Are hanging on reality, whatever there is in terms of language, we had to agree that that's okay. I mean, I can tell you, look, I actually can fly. You don't believe it? Say, oh, it's not flight. You just jumped. I said, no, that's flight. No, jump. You're crazy. All right, so I got a good friend. I bring him in and say, no, I find that's like flight too. I mean, after all, he was in the air. And he said, no. I thought, well, all right, I bring 20 more people. Let's say I bring 200 people in here and say, flight. He just flew. So who's crazy? Especially if we reduce this crowd of boredom to one, and you say, yeah, that's flight. So everything we count as real, whether it's men, women, right, wrong, I can't get it and you can't get it, but reality is held together by the process by which we live together. Reality is quickly lost the moment we disagree. You can take a relationship of 30 years and within 30 seconds destroy it. You can take gender distinctions that have existed for centuries and within 10 years destroy them. Because it's all held together. It's kind of like this fragile form that just delicately holds us together. And if we don't have each other in that coordination, there isn't anything. Everything I can say is already depends on, is that okay? Is that okay? The gestures, where are they? Those are gestures only because you agree. That's okay, you can do that here. We've seen that before, that's what we do. All the clothing, that's okay. You're all right. Now I ask this question. What is it that you do in the world? From getting up in the morning, putting on clothes, going to work, raising children, going to organization, going to politics, whatever you're doing that doesn't depend on that kind of coordination. It's to say that coordination allows us to be who we are at all. Process before the persons. Okay, so that's the attempt to say, look, what if we looked at things, not individuals that need particular, that they're just parts of coordinated actions. And those coordinated actions may be within a family, but they may be also outside of that family, because that coordination process doesn't stop at the door. It's moving throughout the society. And my tendency then is to focus on the coordinations. To say, if there's a way out of this, it's somehow got to be in the coordinations, and it's somehow got to improve the capacity again to move with the flow of change. Okay, part 3. What does this mean for me? Well, first, it means trying to look at just the therapeutic context of enhancing the possibility of the coordinations that will take us in the directions we want to go. In some sense, you know all this already, but it's going to take a slightly different turn, I think. Harlene Anderson, a sort of famous phrase, said one should not have knowledge, that knowing is a problem. And what by that she meant was essentially, if you know already a system or a practice you're going to follow, it doesn't take into account the people you're dealing with. So if you exist in a model, and this is the way we do it, let's say classic Milano might be, this is the way we're looking for those logics that are built into the system, and that's what we're going to do, is undo those logics. That's like a vocabulary of practice. It's a way of being with you. It's like asking a question. It's a way of dealing with the people, with your families. But it's a very narrow practice. It's like reducing the language or the ability to move in the flow down to a very small bit. So it's knowledge is needed, but it's what I would call sort of relational process knowledge, the knowledge of moving within any relationship. It's the kind of knowledge I think most of you develop in practice, with every case is different, and you kind of learn different moves. But that kind of knowledge, not knowing that, but knowing how, incredibly important. Again, it is the ability to move with whatever comes and move it in a way that's going to be profitable for the relationship. So this means a huge emphasis on eclecticism of, let's say, in terms of schools, not being in a school of therapy, but using every school of therapy as a resource. Because some people may like, as a Freudian way, to talk about the relationships of sexual desire in the family. That may be what they need to talk about. Can you talk in that language? Everybody should be a Rogerian, probably is, in a way, giving a positive regard to whoever comes in, making them feel comfortable. Everybody might look for a designated patient within a family at certain times, at certain places. But these are all like vocabularies of relating. The greater the number of vocabularies you have, the more you supplely and effectively you can move within the therapeutic relation. It's like the difference between being able to speak only one language and being polyfluent. So all the schools of therapy have something to offer. I have an older brother who was an MD, and he was a brain researcher for many, many years. But he had a large family, and he never paid any attention to the family. And one of the kids were kind of driving his wife berserk, and she sort of entered a mental institution. Then one of the children tried to burn down his house. At that point, he said the real hard problems are not in the brain, they're in families. And he changed his whole profession, went back to become a therapist, psychiatrist, and eventually ended up at the head of a clinic. Okay? However, I lived with this boy for a number of years, and to me, if you were to diagnose him, you'd say he's pretty much on the spectrum. I mean, to me, it was like, I couldn't imagine John actually being at all sort of Rogerian with anybody. He's like, he was an authoritarian, he just knew everything. I just learned how to argue because growing up with this guy was difficult. Anyway, I sort of thought, how is he so successful? I mean, they loved him. Well, so I went and talked with him about it. He actually works in a clinic in the Midwest. And when the clients come in with a problem or a family problem, he just tells them what to do. Like, oh, you're having that problem? Well, don't do that. I want you to come back next week. I want you to have reduced that and to tell me how you've done it. It's just like totally authoritarian. He doesn't listen to anything except what the symptom is, and it's like, and they love it. They don't want to talk about my feelings and maybe it's this and maybe it's that, and I don't know, none of that schmoozy stuff. Just tell me what to do, doc, and I'm going to do it. I have this problem too, raising a dog. I have a dog that loved me, but he didn't love many people, and he was a little bit overprotective. And so I took him to he needed to go to the veterinarian, and the dog starts snarling at the veterinarian. And the veterinarian, every time we'd approach the dog, would get worse and worse. And it was like, and the vet turned to me and said, "Use your command voice." And I said, "I don't have a command voice. I'm a Rogerian." I needed a command voice. Why not all of the ways in which we can relate brought into the therapy room? The spectrum of being human. I have another therapist friend who every time I pass his office, it's laughter's coming out. Somehow he turns everything into laughter, and I don't know how he does it, but people seem to love that, at least certain people. But it's another voice, it's another way of relating. The more you can immerse yourself in the ranges of possible relating, the more supple you become in terms of any client that walks in. Now that also means, especially now, the sea of clients is never going to look the same, or at least it's going to be continuously different. It's not only because every kid is going to be in some kind of different world, but you've also got immigration, you've also got broken homes, and so on and so on. It's like the massive differences in the kinds of people you deal with. Now, it's okay to listen, but far better if you can get into the world of the person and speak their language. All right, well, I've got another grandchild. My son-in-law was having problems with him. It was because he was deeply into video games, too much into video games that were about shooting, armed video games. And they were in loggerheads with it. They were in conflict. So when I said, show me the games. And he started talking about them. He has a huge lore and what they do and why they're important and so on. What he gets from them, people coming from all over the world and playing these games. I mean, it's a totally different perspective, and that's what the father needed to be doing, not looking at the games and saying, look, they're awful, but sitting with the kid, as a therapist might do, get into the games, have a language, be part, solidify their relationship so it is you and the language and the child are one. I look at TikTok from time to time, Instagram from time to time. If any of you don't do that, you're not good therapists. They're like journeys into anthropology, like what's happening in the world, what's funny, who's influencing, why are they doing that? It's like a tour of another world. But that's the world people live in. I mean, I talked to my daughter, who's 22, and she's into politics. And she said, really important thing about the election in the United States right now is rat. I'm thinking, what? I said, oh, I have no idea. She said, now there are thousands of young people who are getting together because there's a singer. Now, some of you may know this better than I do, for some of you may, because I can't get it fully. But the singer had an album called Rat, and that became a way of describing the political, I guess, Harris. So she got to be Rat cool. and it's thousands of kids who were doing that. I mean, it was like a learning experience. So that's the lingo. That's another language, getting into the languages of the other so they become your languages. I heard just an awful tale. The psychiatrist dealing with a young girl from an Indian background, and she's having a lot of bad dreams and is feeling very guilty because she's stolen something, hides that not belong to her, and she felt this wolf spirit was after her now to seek revenge. And he said, no, there's no wolf spirit. That's just making that up. It's like, there's no wolf spirit. Don't worry about that. She committed suicide. And the therapist becomes very unhappy because he's like, I couldn't get into that language. Into the language of the person and giving that some credibility, being able to work supplely with that. Anyway, so that's a piece of it. It's like expanding radically the range of relational languages, you might say, that we can engage, which we can engage. Ultimately, and I can't do it here, ultimately, that would be the case of also what children today should be into, but I can't go into that. That is, the more languages they can speak. Well, I'll come back to it in a minute. I'm going to quickly say one or two things. I'm going to go a little bit rapidly, then I want to go into one that, because some of this you know. One of them is, secondly, expanding the range of relationships in which people are engaged. That is, again, putting the relationship prior to the person, but getting the person into relationships which do give meaning, which do give direction, which do have ethics of some kind, which do give a way to go. And some of this you kind of already know. Get people into things like bands or athletics or any kind of group that's doing something. It's not being in any group is the problem. But possibly expanding that. All right? People yesterday in this workshop came up with, well, look, why not expand it with multiple families, more multiple family therapy. So expand the group, which meaning is being made. Fascinating case in Brazil, where this woman does once a month, she has a community meeting in which somebody presents a problem, and the whole community gets into a conversation about how to deal with the problem. Let's say drugs in that community, and her kid is addicted. And the whole community begins to talk through. So you create community, again, a co-creation of meaning in a much larger space. I thought it was beautiful to be able to do that. I like very much expanding that not necessarily into personal issues. That is, I have a friend who works with dogs in therapy. The kid has somebody they can train and be comfortable with and do tricks with, develop a sense of, I'm okay, I can do things. Another one works with horses, all ponies, adolescents who love coming there and having problems and work with it. I love ordinary life therapy coming out of Sweden, which you place schizophrenics into a farm-sitting situation, just let them live normally for a while, just become part of the setting, part of the family. But I want to go one step further because I'm running out of time, and this is really important. Look, I worry about the typical therapeutic model in which we become just those people who are trying to repair the brokenness that's being created. You just create it and we'll try to fix it. So society just goes on banging us up, and now the numbers of people who seem to be broken increases, as you've seen. So we're just sitting here, accepting it all. Now, secondly, you're one of the very few professions that has any kind of sense of what's going on at the local level in terms of people's relationships, of working with more than single individuals. You're into a sensitivity to the process. You shouldn't be just dealing with the garbage that's being spewed out of the system. You should be changing the system. You should become an activist, changing the system. You know more than anybody. Why isn't this profession part of the policy-making process? Now, this came up yesterday in the workshop as well. We should have political. We should be giving information to people about what's going on and why these are not illnesses that you're taking. They're products of a process that really needs to be changed. Don't diagnose them, work with the process. Become advocates. Now the big one, and I'm going to run out of time here, but it's in a book which is translated into Danish now called Beyond the Tyranny of Testing. Relational alternatives to testing, to evaluation, The point here is, look, in addition to kids who find themselves directionless, anxious, afraid, depressed, and so on, you've got school, a day-to-day pressure system in which they're being under attack every day for who they are. Am I any good? That school is a production machine for individualism. Everybody has got to worry about themselves first. Me first. Who am I? And compared to everybody else. So certain people are going to get to look down on everybody. A lot of people come out and say, I'm just an average person. And those others are just going to drop out. Why wouldn't they? Why do you want to be in a system that's telling you you're no good day after day after day? Why do you want to be in a system that's giving you what for you are meaningless lessons? I don't see how any of this is related to what's going on today. Why not? Why aren't we involved with it? I'm sitting here learning things that just are totally irrelevant. and then being tested on them. That is the way in which public education is set up. Is a corrosive device in terms of well-being of our kids and our future. But further, in terms of the skills of relating that I talked about. If I'm in a system in which everybody's under evaluation, I'm doing my work for me, who are you other than a contestant? That is I don't want to be with you too much. I don't want to benefit you too much because you may make a better grade. Or you'll say, I know I didn't study for that exam at all, as if you didn't stay up half the night doing it, because you want to make other people not stay up. They don't need to study either. And therefore, they're not going to do well. I mean, it's all about me, and it's not about trying to learn to relate to you. It's about learning how to protect myself, to have my idea and to protect it from your critique, or to critique your idea. At the end of the day, I know how to present, I know how to defend it, and I know how to criticize anybody who stands in the way. Like I'm a battleship prepared to fight. Doesn't need to be that way, and the real problem here is evaluation. Because everything is tied to testing. You have a system which depends on tests for evaluation of the system. How good are the grades? How are the teachers helping people to make better grades? Is the school helping people to make higher test scores? Is the nation up to the test scores of other nations? It's all in testing. The value of education becomes in passing tests. You take away tests and make that into a more dialogic, hey, let's see where this is going. Let's together decide whether this was good work or not. Take away that, make it far more dialogic. That is another form of relationship where there's care about what's going on. Then you open up the possibility of dialogic classrooms, which are more conversational. You open up the possibility for project-based learning together. You open the possibility for non-standardized curricula, because standardized curricula and top-down teaching are necessary for testing. Project-based learning is a problem. Dialogue in classrooms is a problem. You have to have standardized curriculum or you can't test. So get rid of testing, and you open up a huge span of possibilities for other kinds of relationships in which people can learn to get on with each other, coordinate in a way which is not contentious, in which we could work together to create things, as opposed to my work versus your work. I've run over time. I think there's at least a few minutes for commentary or questions.
Martin and Lene with the microphones, so just put your hand up and you will get the microphone and comment and ask questions and so on.
You were talking a lot about the confusion from adults, especially professional adults, in regards to understanding now how children communicate and learning how to speak their language. But the adults, they also created the technology, they created the predisposition for the capitalistic system and everything that kind of deteriorated the structure of society as we know it. When I grew up, I had to learn how to navigate or live in the adult world, and now it's the other way around, it seems.
I had to,
right? We have to learn how to live.
World, but now
and
it seems the other way around.
Yeah, I would really like you to comment on that part. And maybe I often feel like there's still such a resistance for adults to take responsibility, especially when it comes to digital, if I have to have a focus point, digitalization.
The part I really like about that is the emphasis I've had placed on understanding the lingo of the younger people. And that if you expand the vocabulary of the young, again, because that was the piece I didn't really go into, that is, they should become as adept in movement, the movement of the flow, as you are, ultimately. That means also speaking the language of adults. There should be more of an emphasis on getting into the language of that we speak, you might say, that other cultures speak in a more appreciative way. Now, how to do that without you generally you find a lot of resistance, but that shouldn't be that difficult. Well, here's a case that came up yesterday in a discussion. What if a group like this created groups outside in which people could relate? A family therapy association or the government creates a group of that is going to work with the environment on environmental issues. And we're going to support that as a government. Okay? Now, to work with the environment, you're going to have to learn the adult language. And you'll just do it because you need that to do your work. So, again, creating conditions of relationship in which that becomes just something you want to do. That's the way I would tend to think of it. Create the relational conditions under which this happens. Yeah.
I have a son who years ago was kind of wondering how can he be in this world. And he met some teachers, I'm grateful for them for the rest of my days, who met him and sort of they contributed to change his perception of himself in the world. So aren't you a little hard on the school?
On the schools?
Yeah. Just to tease you. I mean, aren't you a little rough on the school because they are also a resource?
Yeah, but you had to tell me that story as if it was a dramatic story. That wasn't the norm. That becomes an interesting story because it's so different.
Well,
now it is true you've got a sort of, and I don't understand the full education system here because it's a little complicated for me, but I understand that there is a strain in this system which indeed does give you far better kind of relationships with teachers than we have.
Sometimes.
You're better off than we are. We have masses to educate, and again, it becomes like an industrial scene.
Could we have a comment or a question from you, Kasper?
Thank you for being so inspiring. I was just listening to you talk, and you moved towards bringing in some hope. You said that, and you linked it to therapeutic work, and then you also have some emphasis on learning. So that theory of learning in general, which may be sort of being theoretical in a way, I was just very curious about you linking that to your talk today. It was also in the text that was proposed. I was wondering if you could attach a few comments to that choice.
Yeah, I guess another way to add is there a learning theory behind all this? Is that sort of what you're asking?
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's a good question. I haven't worked that out totally, but my general sense is that learning of the analytic kind that we generally have is pretty much useless. It has certain but if you don't embed that language in an actual set of actions, it just goes by the board. I mean, I don't know about you, but if you've had math when you were in school, and you are now 35 and try to help your kid with the math that you had when in school, you don't remember it. It's like bone up on that. And same with learning a language. If you don't use it, it's gone. However, my general sense is, let me do this with you. If I talk with you long enough, Kasper, I will be able to pick up things that you do, the way you smile, all right, the way you concentrate. Because everything I'm doing is imbibed from other people, my ways of being. I represent other people. Part of when I'm with you, I'm creating the person you are within this relationship. So you are now part of me as well. But I pick up you. I pick up the me I become relating to you. I now can do it. I can do it. I am doing it right now. I'm learning how to be in a given way, and the way you're a very intent look. You're creating me in that very look. Okay? So I learn you, I learn me, and I learn this kind of dance we're in, how the choreography goes. You're very intent, and I know I can be drawn into that. So I guess what I'm saying is learning in situ, in the ongoing process of how to do it, I become other people. I become now an absorber. It's like every word I say is not my word. It was developed in relationships. I'm just ventriloquating, in some way, a massive array of relationship, in the same way that I'm ventriloquating all my actions at this moment, because they've been learned in exactly these kinds of relationships. So I tend to want to focus on the way in which we absorb the how-to, as knowing how-to as opposed to knowing that. At least
Ken?
a piece of it.
You could continue for hours. So fantastic. You started by going to all the biggest issues in society, and you insisted on relationships before individuals. You talked about not going with repair the brokenness, but co-creation of meaning and make things and make relationships attractive. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.